viewers to hear an episode of Chordplay, and this is a classical guitar primer. And I did post on Facebook, about acquiring this guitar recently, and I did mention in a few comments that I was planning on doing something like this for the channel. And I did use this guitar recently in the Django Reinhardt 3-for-all, and now I wanted to kind of introduce at least a primer and a kind of a beginning, classical guitar lesson that some of you might jump into and start, working on finger picking and fingerstyle playing, and then start to kind of reveal a little bit of some of the classical guitar secrets. And I know for myself, I became really involved and heavy into Randy Rhoads and Yngwie Malmsteen, when I was younger. I was still, I was a teenager, but I really got into Randy, and then I learned that he studied classical guitar, and I already loved, classical music since I was a kid, long before I played guitar. But I got into Yngwie, I got into Randy, and then I got really curious, and I thought, I like this. I want to learn what that is, and I asked my parents. They signed me up for some classical guitar lessons at a local university, and I studied for 2 years with Renato Baturi, and that was in Evansville, Indiana. Now, Andy Timmons is from Evansville, Indiana, and Andy Timmons also studied with Renato Baturi. Now, that was before, I met Renato, but Renato was literally my introduction to Andy Timmons, because he asked me if I'd ever heard of him, and I thought, no, I don't know who that is. And it was before, Andy really kind of exploded with Danger Danger and, solo material and things like that. And he talked about him, and we were working on, classical guitar. And Renato was essential, for me, because he taught me how to read music. He taught me, classical guitar technique. And he kind of stepped through, the early stages of classical guitar. I worked with him for a couple of years. I also studied it in college, and then later when I was in Atlanta at AIM, I had more, classical guitar in college. And then I just kind of continued to practice and refine and work on pieces, and I bought lots of music and books. And I performed a classical guitar piece at my sister's wedding, and I've been hired, at other weddings and performances. So it's an interesting avenue for any musician, because it's very, strict and historic, obviously. But there's a lot you can learn from studying classical guitar music and the technique. And you can probably tell I don't have the nails. I'm using, my right leg instead of the actual, classical guitar approach. So when I was younger and I studied with Renato, I did have nails, and I did use, my left leg and the footstool and, that whole thing. And then after I kind of ended my time with him and I kind of finished college, I cut the nails, I returned the guitar to the leg that I normally use for my electric guitar, and I just tried to work with it in my comfort zone, and I didn't really worry about the tradition. So no offense to any classical guitarists, but I am a little different than just a strict, straight, classical guitarist. I've studied, but I don't really adhere to all the rules and regulations of classical guitar. All right, a little deeper in this video, we will reveal what opened, this episode, and that's a very famous, classical guitar piece, and I'm sure some of you already know what it is. Some of you probably already know how to play, parts, if not the entire thing, and we will talk about that song. But first, I want to just give some basic starting points and kind of step you up to that point, because I don't want to just jump into that song. I want to kind of give some of those that are learning this for the first time, their footing. I want to kind of help you understand, how to get to where you can play something that sounds exactly like that. So the first thing we're going to do, and this is something I've done with a lot of students over the years that were interested in fingerstyle and finger picking or classical guitar. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up some exercises that are very basic, but they sound good. They sound great. But they're very simple, and they're going to be very simple for your left hand, because I don't want you to be too distracted, playing crazy chord forms or crazy, fingerings on the fretboard. I want you to focus on your right hand. So we're going to keep everything we're doing with the left hand pretty simple, mainly so we can really focus on what's going on over here. And if we, had all of these really big stretches or demanding, fingerings, that would be a distraction, and you would be more focused on your fret hand than your picking hand. So the first thing we're going to do is I want you to just think of Nothing Else Matters, by Metallica, or something along that line, because we're just going to hit open strings in the beginning. So don't worry about fretting anything. And this exercise is literally the opening to Nothing Else Matters. But I've used this with students and it works. And we're going to slowly start making our way toward the piece. So the first thing we're going to do, it's kind of basically based in E minor. And we're going to play the low E, the open G, the open B, and the open high E. And those, 4 strings together sound an E minor chord. And we're not going to worry about the fretted part. We're just going to play the open strings. And you'll notice I'm using my thumb, my index, my middle, and my third. I'm not really worried so much about my pinky, even though I do have some technique or skill using that. I might incorporate it. If I need to roll into like a 5-note chord or arpeggio, I've definitely kind of practiced using the pinky finger. But we're just going to use the first 3 fingers and your thumb, and just roll up and down that arpeggio. And you can go really slow, and then once you get used to it and it's a little more comfortable, then you can start going a little faster and you'll be in control. So that's pretty simple, but that's a good place to start. Simple is good. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that idea and we're going to apply it to E natural minor or E Aeolian. And in the key of E, the notes there would be E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, and then E. Alright, there's E natural minor or E Aeolian. But we're going to translate that scale to the high E string. It's kind of similar to what we just did in the Chordplay, where we had the drones and we were doing a single string, Mixolydian scale on the G string. It's similar to that, but now we're going to play E Aeolian on the high E, like this. And now what I want you to do is do the same thing that we did, just a second ago with those open strings, but we're going to slowly incorporate every single one of those notes until you hit the octave right there on the 12th fret, like this. Now I'm using what's known as a free stroke. My finger is plucking the string and it's moving away from the other strings or the string that I just plucked. And that's very common in classical guitar and fingerstyle music. And there's also a rest stroke where your finger literally rests on an adjacent string after you plucked it. So we're not going to worry about rest strokes right now. Just worry about those free strokes. You're literally kind of moving your fingers away from the strings. So one more time with this exercise. And then descend. Very simple, but it's a very effective exercise to get you started. The next exercise is the same thing, but we're going to flip it upside down. So instead of playing E natural minor on the high E string, we're going to play E natural minor on the low E string. And then you're going to use that basically on the bottom, and you're going to kind of work your way up. And now you're going to be playing also the open G, open B, and open high E, like this. And then you can descend. That's a really good exercise and kind of gives you a very simple variation of the exercise we started with, because everything that you can perform on the high E string, you can also perform, on the low E string. Once you have have the scale arranged on the high E and the low E, and you just start working, with both of those exercises. You can mix it up. You can create little, exercises or etudes, of your own. And this is just a simple, variation that I'm going to share with you. And you can sit there and create, dozens and dozens of different ideas and, just make little melodies and patterns on the fretboard. And anything that you construct like that is going to help you, as long as you, make sure you're using, multiple fingers, and try to, really keep a smooth or even, balance between the notes. Don't speed up too fast, or don't, sag behind and slow down. Just try to keep it very steady, almost like a music box or something, So this is just a basic exercise. And I've kind of flipped the arpeggio pattern upside down. So instead of starting with the low E string and going up and down, we're going to start with the high E string and basically go down and up, like that. Just a basic melody, and you can make up, like I said, dozens of melodies like that. And you could also grab notes on different strings. I could add a bottom part maybe along the A string and grab C and maybe go up to D, or I can go down to, B or the open A. And you can kind of start playing with the idea that we had on the low E and the high E on other strings. And you can just kind of keep those open strings ringing, which is just a bunch of E minor, technically. But you could do this. Something like that. You can just kind of play around, and I'm just kind of loosely, just playing. I'm not really locking in and putting every single thing I'm doing under a microscope. I'm just kind of playing around, with that exercise and that basic idea. The piece that opened this lesson, the song that I played at the beginning, that's a very famous classical guitar piece. That's known as Romanza. And it actually has some controversy, surrounding that song, and it has multiple names. It has 8 or 9 or 10 different names or aliases or nicknames, and there's been a lot of controversy and arguments, surrounding that song, because for a long time, for a couple hundred years, it was known as an anonymous piece. They weren't really sure who wrote it, and that's a good lesson. Always write your name on your music or manuscript paper or whatever, your chart. Always make sure you write your name down, because I think part of the reason it's just they couldn't trace it back to anyone in particular. And then of course lots of people have claimed that they know who the author is, and it's had different names and different people connected to it. But I have done a little bit of research, and the experts, which I'm definitely not a classical guitar expert, I'm still a student of all of this, but Antonio Ribera, I think is how you pronounce his name, a classical guitar composer from the 19th century. And I think the experts kind of agree it was written or composed in the mid to late, 1800s, but they're not really sure. And you can actually find, re-recordings and kind of revised versions and covers of this song in a variety of different places. And one of my favorite is actually the 1980 video game Phoenix actually uses Romanza. And I think Beethoven's, For Elise is also in Phoenix, which when I discovered that, I was like, yeah, I remember that game. And it's like, what? And then when I listened to, listen to some of the music from the game, it's like, wow, that is Romanza. It's really cool. But there's some other people that have definitely, performed or recorded versions of Romanza. So here's an image, kind of revealing some of these places you can find that song. Obviously, you can also find classical guitar recordings of, guitarists authentically, performing that song. So, Julio Iglesias and My Chemical Romance and the Phoenix video game and some of those, people mentioned on that the image I just showed. they did their own kind of spin or take on it, so they changed it a little bit. But you can definitely go back and find, Spanish guitar, collections and Spanish guitar favorites, like albums, and you'll find, different versions of that song. So it's, related to the exercises that we were looking at the beginning. But the main thing is, still E minor. We're still kind of, making or creating this melody on the high E string. And the chord progression, is very interesting. We've actually talked about this very same chord progression, on this channel and with the Chordplay series, because it's E minor and A minor, B7, and then E minor. And that's basically, at least the first half, or the first part of Romanza kind of revolves around that minor tonality. The second part actually shifts to major. But we're not going to worry about the major section yet. We just need to kind of look at this minor section. So there's a melody here. And you're basically doing backward rolls. Right? So instead of doing that up and down, through the strings, you're literally plucking the low E and high E together and then just doing this little 3-string pattern. And you can see that's the first, initial melody or theme. And we're just walking down. And now shift up. You can kind of see. And that's basically the melody. Is where it changes to A minor, and we're going to do this. So you're literally just barring, the 5th fret there on the G, B, and high E, and then coming up and down on the high E string, grabbing the notes C, B, A, B, C. Now it's going to go to technically B7 is what's implied here. And this is tricky. There's a big stretch right here where we're going to be reaching pretty far. So it's a partial bar chord. We're also going to grab the note C right there, as we're playing this B7. It's kind of like a flat 9, I guess you could think of. A little bit of tension there. We're also reaching up and grabbing that D sharp right there on the 11th fret. Kind of restating the first melody, back to E minor. And then B7 right here. We're also grabbing that G note right there on the top. And then we're literally kind of going back to just a regular E minor chord, but we're going to basically spell out the bass notes, and we're also using the top strings open. Something like that. And that's a very, very famous piece. You probably recognize it, or you've heard it somewhere. Maybe you played, Phoenix recently or something. But that song has influenced tons of other musicians, and there's been some kind of rearrangements and variations made, and we're going to talk about that next. All right, at the start of this lesson, I mentioned Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, and it's pretty obvious that I'm not sure if, James or Kirk actually wrote, that intro from Nothing Else Matters. I'm guessing it might have been Kirk, but I don't honestly know. It could have been James, but one of the two has definitely studied classical guitar, if not both of them. And you can kind of hear how it's borrowing. I mean, it's not exact. It's a variation or their own kind of version of it, but it's, it reminds me of Romanza for sure. been shown and transcribed and broken down, lots of different places. But another song that some of you are probably very aware of, and you probably heard a little taste of it when we started, with the open string arpeggios, and we were playing the high E string. When we descended, E natural minor there, you probably heard a little piece of this, and that of course is When the Children Cry by White Lion. And Vito Bratta definitely is a master guitarist, and we've talked about the chords of White Lion or the chords of Vito Bratta, and we had a three-for-all surrounding Vito Bratta, and he's still very popular and kind of in demand. I mean, people definitely miss him from the scene, and his musicianship and his compositional skills and everything. I mean, he's a marvelous musician. But that part, it is actually based around very simple chords, but it's demanding. It's a lot more challenging than a classical guitar primer. But you can find, transcriptions and sheet music of that song. And he's really just kind of playing through, E Aeolian or natural minor on the high E string in the beginning. And just creates this little melody. And then kind of filling it out with those open strings. And right there, it's basically two G's, low E, high E with the open B, and then two F sharps, low E and high E with the open B. So he's kind of stepping down there, and then repeat the beginning again. Basically partial G, D over F sharp, implied. Remember, it's an E minor add 9. B minor. C major. It's kind of adding the sus 4 or sus 2 right there. And then back to G. Second time through, it's a C again. Ends up on D and starts playing with D sus 4. Slides up into D major right there. The 10th fret on the B and the high E. And then a harmonic on the 7th fret on the D, G, and B string. So that second part. Great guitar part, great song too, but it's challenging. But I wanted to demonstrate that just so you can kind of see, if you start with those basic exercises we had in the beginning, kind of maybe start slowly working your way into Romanza, play around with Nothing Else Matters, you can kind of play around with When the Children Cry. But all of these things are going to really help your fingerstyle technique and kind of boost your ability of playing with your fingers. It's going to wrap this classical guitar primer, and this is pretty basic stuff, even though I did move into Romanza and When the Children Cry and stuff like that. But I just wanted to kind of show you like the early steps and then where that can kind of lead you. And I wanted to give some song examples and suggestions to kind of help strengthen and kind of refine your fingerstyle technique. And there's a lot of things you can learn, from classical guitar. And depending on the reaction from this and the feedback and comments I receive, I would like to continue with this and kind of just chip away at classical guitar music, and we can get into all sorts of things. And I would definitely like to start bridging and comparing, classical guitar concepts and ideas, and then relating it to electric guitar, and there are some things and themes and ideas that I really would like to discuss, on this channel, and kind of create some different lessons and really shake things up, where that way it's not just the same type of thing. It can be almost anything. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.